My mother's hand shook as she grabbed my wedding certificate and tore it straight down the middle. "Get out," she said flatly. "Both of you." My aunt laughed. My sister rolled her eyes. My father didn't even look at me, he was staring at Daniel's shoes, like they offended him. Someone muttered, "She chose poverty." My chest burned. My ears rang. I couldn't breathe. I had just married the man I loved, and my entire family was erasing me in real time. That was the moment everything broke. This is the story of how my family turned on me for marrying a broke man, and how I survived what they never expected. My name is Sophia. I met Daniel on a Tuesday morning at a coffee shop where the floor tiles were cracked and the espresso machine wheezed like it had asthma. He was sitting alone with a paperback novel, the kind with a worn spine that told you he'd read it more than once. I spilled my coffee reaching for sugar. He handed me napkins without making me feel stupid about it. We talked for an hour. He worked at a community center teaching kids how to code. No fancy title, no leather briefcase, no stories about business trips to places I'd never been. Just honest work that made him happy. When I told my family about him that weekend, the room went silent. My mother set down her wine glass with a soft clink. She asked what he did. I explained about the community center, about the kids, about how his eyes lit up when he talked about teaching. My father's fork scraped against his plate. My sister, Nicole, checked her phone. My uncle cleared his throat like he was about to say something, then didn't. The silence felt heavy, like something had shifted beneath us and nobody wanted to acknowledge the crack. The advice started the next morning. My mother called while I was getting ready for work. Her voice had that careful tone, like she was talking to a child. She said marriage was about partnership, that I needed someone who could provide security and stability. When I told her Daniel was stable, she paused and asked what his future looked like. I didn't answer because I wasn't sure what she wanted me to say. At Sunday dinner, Daniel joined us. He wore khakis and a button-up shirt, the best he had. He shook my father's hand firmly and thanked my mother for inviting him. Nobody asked him questions. When he spoke, eyes wandered. My Aunt Patricia looked at her nails. Nicole whispered something to my cousin that made them both smirk. Daniel pretended not to notice, but his smile got tighter as the evening dragged on. Walking to his car afterward, he was quiet. He finally said they hated him. I told him they just didn't know him yet. But even as I said it, I felt the lie settle between us like dust. A week before the wedding, my mother called me into her bedroom and closed the door. The room smelled like her perfume, expensive and floral. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap like she was about to deliver bad news. She told me I needed to really think about this. I said I had thought about it. She said no, I needed to truly think, that if I married him, things would change, that I wouldn't have the life I was used to, and they couldn't support decisions they didn't agree with. My stomach dropped. I asked what that meant. She said it meant if I walked out that door as his wife, I shouldn't expect help or respect. That I was choosing him over them. I laughed nervously, waiting for her to smile, to say she was being dramatic. She didn't smile. I whispered that she was serious. She said completely. I left the room with my hands shaking. That night, I called Daniel and cried into the phone. He offered to wait. I said no, that I wasn't waiting for permission to love him. Our wedding was small. Daniel's suit was borrowed from a friend. My dress was simple, bought on sale at a department store 2 towns over. I didn't wear my grandmother's pearls like I'd always imagined because my mother refused to lend them. My family attended, but they sat in the back rows. No tears of joy. No proud smiles. Just tight expressions and crossed arms. During the vows, I heard my aunt whisper something to Nicole. They both laughed softly. Daniel squeezed my hand tighter. At the reception, my father stood to give a toast. I thought maybe this was when things would soften, when he'd say something kind about new beginnings. Instead, he raised his glass and said I'd always been stubborn, and he hoped I knew what I was doing. People clinked glasses awkwardly. Daniel stared at his plate. I told myself love was enough, that we'd prove them wrong, that time would heal the distance. I was wrong about all of it. That night, back at my parents' house to collect my things, my mother stopped me in the hallway. She was holding my wedding certificate, the one we'd just received that afternoon. Her hands trembled as she ripped it down the middle. She told us to get out. My aunt laughed from the living room. Nicole rolled her eyes and went back to scrolling on her phone. My father stood by the window, staring outside like I wasn't even there. I whispered, please. She said I'd made my choice and now I had to live with it. I walked out with one suitcase and Daniel's hand in mine. The front door closed behind us with a sound like a coffin lid. In the car, I couldn't stop shaking. Daniel said quietly that they'd come around. But when I looked back at the house, every light inside went dark at once, like they were erasing me room by room. The first week after the wedding, I checked my phone constantly. No calls. No texts. The family group chat that used to buzz with messages every day went completely silent. I sent a message asking how everyone was doing. It was marked read by 7 people. Nobody replied. I called my mother. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I called again the next day. Same thing. Nicole posted photos online of a family dinner I wasn't invited to. Everyone was smiling, laughing, glasses raised. My seat at the table was gone, replaced by a decorative plant. I stared at that photo for an hour, zooming in on their faces, searching for any sign that they missed me. There was none. Daniel found me crying in the bathroom at 2 a.m. He said they'd forgive me eventually. I asked what if they didn't. He didn't answer. We both knew silence was a kind of answer too. Our apartment was in an old building where the walls were thin and the heating barely worked. We could hear our neighbors arguing through the bedroom wall. The bathroom sink dripped no matter how tight we turned the faucet. Daniel worked late most nights, picking up extra hours wherever he could. I took on freelance writing jobs that paid almost nothing. Some weeks, we chose between groceries and electricity. I learned how hunger feels when pride won't let you ask for help. I learned how to stretch a bag of rice into 5 meals. At night, lying in bed, I'd think about my old life. The house I grew up in with its thick carpets and full refrigerator. My mother's pantry that was always stocked. Sunday dinners where plates were piled high. I thought about calling them, about apologizing, even though I didn't know what I'd apologize for. But every time I reached for my phone, I remembered my mother's face as she tore that certificate. So I put the phone down and went back to being hungry. 3 months after the wedding, I ran into my Aunt Patricia at the grocery store. She was in the produce section, squeezing avocados like she was testing them for lies. I froze when I saw her. Part of me wanted to hide. Part of me wanted to run over and hug her. Before I could decide, I heard her talking to another woman. She was saying something about her niece, shaking her head. She said I'd married some nobody and got myself pregnant on purpose, trying to trap him. She said it was embarrassing. My hands went numb. I wasn't pregnant. I'd never been pregnant. But she said it like it was fact, like she'd been there, like she knew my life better than I did. I left my card in the aisle and walked out. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and realized something that made my chest ache. They were rewriting my story. And I wasn't there to defend myself. Daniel lost his job in November. His boss called him in on a Friday afternoon and said they were restructuring. No warning. No explanation. We thought it was bad luck. Then it happened again at his next job. And again at the one after that. Each time, he'd come home looking smaller, like the world was pressing down on him and he couldn't push back. One night, he sat at our kitchen table with his head in his hands. He said it didn't make sense, that he was good at what he did, that his reviews were always positive. I made calls quietly and carefully. A former colleague of his finally told me the truth. She said someone had been calling around, giving bad references, saying he was unreliable. She said she was sorry, that she thought I should know. My stomach turned to ice. I asked who. She hesitated and said she didn't recognize the name, but they knew a lot about him and about me. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, adding up all the strange coincidences. The job losses. The opportunities that vanished. The rumors that followed us. Someone was working against us. And I had a terrible feeling I knew who. My cousin got married in March. I wasn't invited, but I saw the photos online. The ceremony was at a country club with white flowers and string lights. Everyone looked happy. A week later, my uncle's funeral brought the family together. I debated not going. Daniel said it was my choice. In the end, I went alone, wearing the only black dress I owned. At the reception, my sister Nicole walked up to a group of relatives I didn't recognize. She pointed at me and said that was Sophia, the one who married down. They all turned to look. I felt their eyes scan me from head to toe, taking in my cheap dress, my worn shoes, my lack of jewelry. Someone made a sympathetic sound, like I was a tragedy they were witnessing. I smiled so I wouldn't cry. I smiled until my face hurt. Then I left without saying goodbye to anyone. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and let the tears come. Not because of what Nicole said, but because she said it so casually, like I wasn't worth the effort of real cruelty. The stress changed us. Daniel and I started arguing about small things. Dishes left in the sink. Bills we couldn't pay. Plans we couldn't make. One night, after a particularly bad fight about money, he looked at me with tired eyes. He asked if I regretted him. I opened my mouth to say no. The word should have come instantly, reflexively. But I hesitated. Just for a second. His face crumpled. He turned away. I tried to tell him I didn't mean it, but he said I'd hesitated, that it was answer enough. We slept on opposite sides of the bed that night. In the morning, we apologized, but something had shifted. A crack had formed that we both pretended wasn't there. I wondered if this was what my mother had predicted. If she'd known all along that love wasn't enough to hold two people together when the world kept pulling them apart. But even as I wondered, I refused to call her. Refused to admit she might have been right. I was in the grocery store, standing in the canned goods aisle, when I heard her voice. My mother. She was one aisle over, talking to someone I couldn't see. Her voice carried the way it always did when she thought she was being clever. She said I'd come crawling back when he failed, that I always did, that I just needed to hit rock bottom first. My hands went numb. The can of beans I was holding slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. She continued, saying Patricia told her we were barely surviving. She said good, that maybe I'd learned something. I stood there frozen, listening to my own mother discuss my suffering like it was entertainment. When I finally moved, I left my cart and walked out. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing through my nose because I felt like I might be sick. That night, something changed inside me. I stopped trying to win them back. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped caring what they thought. I started working. I took every freelance writing job I could find. I worked late into the night after Daniel fell asleep, my laptop screen glowing in the dark. I learned new skills online, graphic design, social media management, basic coding. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not Daniel. Not friends. Nobody. I worked in silence, building something they couldn't see. Daniel noticed I was staying up later, but he didn't push. He had his own battles. We moved around each other like roommates, polite and distant. Some nights, exhaustion made my vision blur. I'd fall asleep at the keyboard and wake up with letters imprinted on my cheek. But I kept going. Because I'd realized something important in that grocery store aisle. They were waiting for me to fail. They'd placed bets on my collapse. And I decided I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in June. The test showed 2 lines before I'd even finished peeing on it. I sat on the bathroom floor for an hour, staring at those lines, trying to figure out how I felt. Scared. Excited. Terrified. I didn't tell my family. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I needed to protect this tiny life from the people who'd tried to destroy mine. When I told Daniel, he cried. Happy tears this time. He held me and whispered promises about the future, about being better, about building something real. For the first time in months, we felt like a team again. That night, lying in bed with his hand on my stomach, I made a decision. This child would never know the kind of conditional love I'd grown up with. This child would never have to choose between family and happiness. I would make sure of it. 5 months into my pregnancy, Daniel landed an opportunity. Not a huge one, just a contract position with a tech startup. But it paid better than anything he'd had in over a year. Within 2 days, my mother called. Her voice was dripping with false warmth. She said she'd been thinking about me, that I was her daughter, that she'd been praying for me every single day. I knew she was lying. I could hear it in the way she emphasized certain words, like she was reading from a script. I asked what she wanted. She said she'd heard Daniel got a job and that it was wonderful, that maybe we could have dinner soon and catch up. I stared at the wall, feeling nothing. I said I'd think about it, then hung up. She called back 3 times. I didn't answer. Daniel asked if I wanted to reconnect with them. I said no. He didn't push. One night in my 7th month of pregnancy, Daniel finally told me the truth. The whole truth. We were sitting on our worn couch, my feet in his lap because my ankles were swollen. He'd been quiet all evening, wrestling with something. He finally said there was something I needed to know. I waited. He told me he'd had money once, that his family had a lot of it. Old money. Real estate. Investments. The kind of wealth that buys silence and power. He said he'd walked away from it 5 years ago. I asked why. His jaw tightened. He said because he'd found out what it was built on, the deals his father made, the people he hurt, the laws he broke. He paused, looking at his hands. Then he said my family was involved. My uncle. My father. They were business partners with his. When he threatened to go public, they made sure he disappeared. Quietly. Completely. My heart stopped. He said my family didn't hate him because he was broke. They hated him because he knew their secrets. 2 weeks later, my parents invited us to dinner. The invitation came through a formal text from my mother, polite and distant, like we were business associates. Daniel didn't want to go. I insisted. I told him I needed to see them with new eyes. The house looked exactly the same. Same manicured lawn. Same expensive cars in the driveway. Same chandelier glittering in the entryway. My mother hugged me like we were strangers. My father shook Daniel's hand with a grip that said he was still in control. At dinner, they were polite. Fake warm. They asked about Daniel's job with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They asked about the baby with voices that sounded rehearsed. Nobody apologized. Nobody acknowledged what they'd done. Instead, my uncle leaned forward and said Daniel and he should talk about investment opportunities, that a smart young man like him just needed the right guidance. I saw it then. the calculation, the strategy. They weren't sorry. They were repositioning. My uncle's proposal came in an email 3 days later. A partnership opportunity with careful language and professional formatting. I read every word, every clause, every hidden string attached. They wanted control of Daniel's career, of our finances, of us. In exchange, they offered money, support, and family unity. Daniel left the decision to me. I called my uncle from our kitchen, speakerphone on so Daniel could hear. I thanked him calmly for the offer but said we were declining. Silence on the other end. Then he told me not to be foolish, that this was a good deal. I asked for who. His voice hardened. He said I was making a mistake. I said maybe, but it was mine to make. I hung up. Daniel looked at me with something like awe. He asked if I was sure about this. I said completely. That night, my phone exploded with messages. Angry. Disappointed. Threatening. I turned it off and slept better than I had in months. The rumors started 2 days later. Online. At church. Through mutual friends. I was ungrateful, manipulative. Daniel was using me for connections. We were lying about struggling. I'd gotten pregnant to trap him. He'd been arrested once. I was on drugs. None of it was true. All of it spread like wildfire. People I'd known my whole life crossed the street to avoid me. Former friends unfollowed me online. At the doctor's office, a woman I recognized from church stared at my pregnant belly with disgust. Daniel wanted to fight back, to set the record straight. I told him no. I said the truth didn't need defending, that it just needed time. But at night, alone in the bathroom, I cried. Because even though I believed what I'd said, the lies still hurt. In my 8th month, Daniel asked if we should leave town. Start over somewhere new. Somewhere without history or judgment. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Then I said no. He asked why. I said because I was done running, that they wanted us to disappear, to prove them right, to fail quietly somewhere they didn't have to watch. I put my hands on my swollen belly. I said I wasn't giving them that satisfaction. Daniel studied my face. Then he nodded slowly. He said okay, that we'd stay. That night, I felt the baby kick harder than ever before. Like she agreed. Like she was ready to fight too. The truth surfaced in late September. Not because I exposed it. Not because Daniel went public like he'd once threatened. It surfaced because karma doesn't need permission. My father's business partner was arrested for fraud. During the investigation, documents came to light. Names. Transactions. Years of carefully hidden corruption. My uncle's name appeared in the first wave of reports. Then my father's. The news spread through our city like a brushfire. Phone calls. Urgent meetings. Lawyers arriving at my parents' house at midnight. I watched it all from a distance, my hand on my belly, feeling strangely calm. Daniel looked at me and asked if I'd done anything. I said no honestly. He asked how then. I said quietly that sometimes people destroy themselves, that you just have to wait. My mother called at 3 a.m, 2 weeks after the scandal broke. Her voice was raw from crying. She said we needed to talk. I didn't hang up. I didn't yell. I just listened to her breathe on the other end of the line, gathering courage that wouldn't come. I asked finally about what. She whispered everything, the things they said, the things they did. She said they needed to fix this. I asked why now. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was small. She said because they needed me. There it was. The truth underneath everything. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Just we need you. I said gently that she'd had me, that for 26 years she'd had me, that she threw me away. She said they made a mistake. I said no, that they made a choice, that there was a difference. I hung up before she could respond. Daniel found me sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. He asked if I was okay. I said yeah. And I meant it. For the first time, I felt nothing when I thought about them. Not anger. Not sadness. Just peace. Their world fell apart methodically, piece by piece. Business deals collapsed. Partnerships dissolved. Friends who'd once clustered around them suddenly had other commitments. My father's company went bankrupt in November. My uncle faced criminal charges. The house I grew up in went up for sale. People who'd once whispered about me started whispering about them instead. The same church ladies who'd judged my marriage now gossiped about their fall from grace. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Daniel and I moved into a small house at the edge of town. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms. A backyard big enough for a swing set someday. Our daughter was born on a cold December morning. We named her Hope because that's what she represented. When I held her for the first time, I cried. Not from pain. From relief. She would never know the people who'd tried to break me. She would grow up knowing only love without conditions. 6 months after Hope was born, my family asked to meet her. Not demanded. Asked. Nicole sent the text. My mother called. Even my father, who'd barely spoken to me in 2 years, left a voicemail asking if we could start fresh. Daniel left the decision to me. I thought about it for a week. I thought about forgiveness. About second chances. About what I owed them versus what I owed myself. In the end, I said no. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. Out of clarity. I told Daniel they were still my family, but they weren't my people anymore. He understood. He always did. We built a life that felt earned. Small and quiet. Daniel taught coding to kids again, this time at a better program with better pay. I ran my freelance business from home, taking breaks to nurse Hope and watch her discover her toes. Some mornings, I woke up and couldn't believe this was real. That we'd survived. That we'd built something beautiful from the ruins they'd tried to bury us in. 2 years after my wedding, I ran into my mother at the farmer's market. She was alone, looking older than I remembered. Thinner. Gray streaks in her hair she hadn't bothered to cover. She saw me before I could turn away. Saw Hope strapped to my chest in a carrier, chubby legs kicking. She breathed my name. I stopped. Waited. She whispered that Hope was beautiful. She asked with tears in her eyes if she could hold her. I looked at this woman who'd torn my wedding certificate in half. Who'd told me not to come back. Who'd funded my failure and celebrated my struggles. I felt Hope's warm weight against my chest. Felt her tiny fingers grip my shirt. I said gently no, that I didn't think so. My mother's face crumpled. She said please, that she was sorry, so sorry, to let her make it right. I touched Hope's soft hair, breathing in her baby smell. I said some things can't be made right, that they can only be learned from. I walked away without looking back. Behind me, I heard my mother crying. I didn't stop. Because I'd learned something my family never understood. You don't win by standing over the people who hurt you. You don't win by accepting their apologies or letting them back in. You win by building a life so full of love that there's simply no room for them anymore. Daniel was waiting by our car, holding shopping bags and smiling. Hope reached for him, babbling nonsense. We drove home together, windows down, radio playing, my husband's hand in mine. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, perfectly free. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt dismissed or underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you most, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by who stays or who leaves. Sometimes the people who walk away from you are actually clearing the path to your freedom. If you're going through something similar right now, stay strong. Keep building in silence. Keep protecting your peace. The right people will see your value without you having to prove it. And the ones who don't? They'll watch from a distance while you build something they can never touch. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real stories about resilience, revenge, and finding peace on your own terms. Drop a comment below and let me know what you would have done in Sophia's situation. Your story matters too. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.